to Adult Children of Aging Parents, or ACAP. My name is Michaela Tate, and I, along with Bruce McReynolds, serve as co-chapter coordinators of ACAP Guilford County. On behalf of the ACAP Guilford County leadership team, we would like to welcome you to tonight's presentation entitled Communicating with Someone Living with Alzheimer's and Other Dementias. ACAP Guilford County programs are presented the third Thursday of each month, and starting in June, the programs will begin at 6 p.m. June, we will be going to in-person meetings, but don't worry, we will be streaming the programs as well. The meeting in person will be held at First Baptist Church on West Friendly Avenue. You can visit the upcoming events section of the ACAP community website at acapcommunity.org to view the presentations. We hope that you will join us for our upcoming programs. The topic for our June program will be Shielding Loved Ones from Scams and Fraud. The program will be held on Thursday, June 22nd. I need to confirm that date because it looks like I might have put that one in wrong.
Yeah,
with
Michaela,
the option to join in. Yes.
And that is the 16th of June is our next program.
So the 16th is correct?
Yes.
Okay, so it will be on June 16th, and with the option to join in person or virtually. Be sure to subscribe to the ACAP Community YouTube channel and click on the bell notification icon to be alerted for future videos. If you would like to be notified of upcoming programs, please be sure to join our emailing list at acapguilfordcounty@gmail.com. We invite you to visit the ACAP community website for information on upcoming programs from all of our ACAP chapters. You can also take advantage of expert-led content in our podcast library found on acapcommunity.org. In order to bring our programming to you at no cost, we have some really great organizations that have stepped up to sponsor our activities and monthly programs. In Guilford County, our annual sponsors that make all the chapter activities possible include Griswold Home Care, Providence Place, Health Team Advantage, and Booth, Harrington, and Johns. For tonight's program, I would like to introduce our program sponsor, Harmony at Greensboro, and would like to turn it over to Judy Perdue to give us a little bit more information about Harmony at Greensboro.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Judy and I am at Harmony at Greensboro. We are very honored to be a sponsor of this event. We are a community that offers independent living, assisted living, and memory care. We'd love for you to come visit if you're interested or if you're looking for any kind of resources. I'm happy to talk with you about anything that you might need. Thank you so much.
So let's jump into our topic of tonight's program. Communicating with someone living with Alzheimer's and other dementias. People living with dementia gradually lose the ability to communicate with others. Changes progressively affect spoken and written language, while communication through gestures and behaviors may persist longer. As the ability to communicate decreases, individuals living with dementia may have difficulties expressing themselves and understanding others. So tonight we have got Jonna Stagg to present for us. She is a licensed clinical social worker at a memory disorder clinic. She has had the privilege of working with families and individuals diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia for over 2 years in both an inpatient and outpatient setting. Pursuing a passion of education, volunteers at the Alzheimer's Association as a community educator, which led her to be our presenter today. Thank you so much for being with us, and I'll be more than happy to turn it on over to you to begin tonight's program.
Sorry, I was muted. Perfect. Thank you, Michaela. I appreciate it. And first and foremost, I'd just like to welcome everyone, and I appreciate you either attending or watching at some point. Today, we are going to be reviewing effective communication strategies, and that is the goal of today. And I understand Michaela is pulling up the PowerPoint, and then we will get started. Perfect. So next slide, please. So we have a couple learning objectives for today. So we'll explore how to communicate and how to communicate with someone living with any form of dementia. So by the end of today's program, the goal is for you to be able to explain the communication changes that take place throughout the course of the disease, decode any verbal or behavioral message delivered from someone living with dementia, and respond in ways that are helpful to that person, and identifying some strategies to help connect and communicate at each stage of the disease. Next slide, please. So the big question, what is communication? I know we communicate all day, every day via different ways. So communication is more than just talking and listening. It's also about sending and receiving messages through attitude, tone of voice, facial expressions, and body language. Communication is a way to express who we are and how we relate to each other. So as the brain changes with Alzheimer's disease and other dementia-related progression, people lose the ability to speak and decode language in the usual ways. So the better we understand these changes, the better we can connect with people living with Alzheimer's and other dementias throughout the course of the disease. Next slide, please. So as Alzheimer's disease and other dementias progress, people lose their ability to communicate their thoughts and feelings through words. Unfortunately, they also lose the ability to understand the words that others speak to them. However, I do want to reassure you, they maintain a sense of self throughout the stages of the disease. And when I say self, I mean that elements of those characteristics that make a person unique will remain part of them throughout the disease. So connecting with this person's self is key to effective communication, staying connected, and giving them a voice as the disease progresses. So in the early stage of the disease, there may be just a few noticeable changes in a person's ability to communicate with words, or there may be no recognizable changes at all. Asking the person how he or she would like to be helped with words can be useful in this stage. So language abilities diminish as the disease progresses, and communication moves from easy conversation to relying on emotions and the five senses to connect. As care partners and caregivers, you are the ones that will have to adjust the way you communicate and maintain connections with them throughout the disease. Remember, the essence of each person continues to be there. Your goal is to respect the person as an adult and to adjust your communication based on what is meaningful to the person today, no matter what stage. Next slide, please. So we are going to be discussing at first the early stages. So in the early stage, you may or may not see changes in the way the person communicates. For some people, there may be shifts in their ease with words or conversations. So some of the most common changes you may notice in early stages are listed on this slide, and they include difficulty finding the right words, taking longer to respond or speak, withdrawing from conversations, struggling with decision-making or problem-solving, and reacting more emotionally than in the past, or avoiding discussion of the disease and its impact. So whether or not you notice changes in the way a person speaks, communication in the early stage is crucial. This is a period in which everyone involved is adjusting to the diagnosis and is having thoughts and feelings about the changes that are going to be ahead of you guys. So remember that denial is a part of this disease for some, and while for others, emotions can feel overwhelming. So coming to terms with the diagnosis and the emotions that you are all feeling by talking together and expressing your connection is the best way to start that journey together. This will help both you accept the diagnosis, move forward, and discover new ways to live a positive, fulfilling life together. And communication through this process can also bring closeness that will help everyone adjust more easily as the disease progresses. So next slide, please. So we are going to have our first video of the session. And as soon as it loads, we can hit play. And this is Martha Tierney. She's from the Alzheimer's Association home office, and she's here to help us talk about more helpful ways to communicate in early stages. Oh. Is it not working for you? If you want to return to the slide, I'll just go through what the video said. We don't have to worry about it. It's fine. We will move on and we will adjust. So what the important things this video was going to share with you was that caregivers may struggle to know how to help the person with communication in the early stages. One of the best ways to do that is asking the person directly. And by asking the person for his or her preference, that shows that you want to help while being respectful of the person's feelings. Nice slide. There we go. Perfect. So one of the best ways to be sure you're offering the help with communication that a person needs is to ask directly. I know I say it a lot, but it really is truly the most important thing you can do. And the best example that I have is, like, if a person's struggling to find the right words, you may want to ask, do you want me to suggest words, or do you want me to wait while you try and figure out the words? So that's an example that you can use to, like, ask directly. You want to make sure that you keep your sentences as direct and straightforward to help the person avoid feeling lost in the conversation. So the shorter you can make your sentences and the more clear you can make your meaning, the better that's going to be. You want to avoid those long explanations, and also take your cue from the individual and make sure you're not talking down to them, because that can also be an event that could trigger some negative emotions. It may take the person longer to find words or put them together and express them. So be sure to allow extra time for conversations. We don't want anyone to feel pressured, and no one enjoys feeling pressured or rushed. So keep in mind the conversation needs will change over time. So they're going to look different. And in the early stage, a person with dementia needs to have his or her voice heard. You can help facilitate this when you meet the person right where they are today, regardless of the state of the disease. And also be sure to include the person in any conversation that they wish. I mean, especially if it's going to affect their future. Including the individual can be empowering and engaging for them. Next slide, please. So the other things we ask you to keep in mind when considering communication in the early stages is we don't want to make assumptions about the person's ability to communicate because of Alzheimer's or other dementia diagnosis. Everyone's journey is different, and there is really no mold. So we don't want to make assumptions about what individuals can or cannot do. Speak directly to the person if you want to know how he or she is doing. And we suggest maintaining eye contact at this stage, so that way the person knows that you are speaking to them and there are those physical cues that you are speaking to them. Explore which method of communication is most comfortable for the person. This could be letters, email, phone calls, in person, or nowadays with COVID, it could be Zoom. So make sure that you have that conversation of which way is the best. And one thing I talk about almost consistently at the clinic with my families and individuals is humor. So it is okay to laugh. I cannot stress that enough. And if you can laugh at a situation, it tends to allow some healing. And sometimes humor lightens the mood and makes communication 10 times easier. And also be honest and frank about your feelings. Try not to pull away. Your friendship and support are important for this person with dementia or Alzheimer's. Next slide, please. So we are going to transition to the middle stage. So many changes in the middle stage of Alzheimer's or other dementias affect communication. If you notice some of these changes in the early stage, they are likely to become more pronounced in the middle stage. Some changes you may notice are listed on this slide. So increasing difficulty to find the right words, using familiar words repeatedly, inventing new words to describe familiar things. An example of this would be somebody trying to say maybe clock, and instead of saying clock, they say like wall circle or wall numbers, things like that. They're trying to find a way to describe what they're trying to tell you. They could easily lose train of thought. They may even speak less often. And they also communicate through behavior rather than words more often. So some of the others include that you might see is difficulty organizing words logically. So you may see someone start to mix up the arrangement of their sentences, revert to speaking in a native language if that individual does have a native language, They may end up using curse words. They may end up relying on gestures instead of speaking. They may have difficulty following a conversation or even a TV program, or they may have difficulty decoding what others even say. So changes in the brain, changes in the brain make tracking and decoding words more difficult. For that reason, people begin to use behavior to communicate more often in the middle stage of the disease. Next, we'll discuss the adjustments you can make to help you continue to connect with the person living with Alzheimer's and other dementias. Please note that some physical conditions and medications can affect a person's ability to communicate. If changes occur suddenly and dramatically, consult your primary care provider. There may be a medical issue that needs to be addressed right away, such as a urinary tract infection or a side effect of the medication. And I do see that quite a bit in the clinic where I work, where people will see these sudden behavior changes. And typically the first question is, does this person have a UTI? So it does not hurt to go to your PCP and check this information out. And when I say PCP, I mean primary care provider. So there is another video, but as we saw last time, it does not work too well. So I will just go ahead and do the notes that were going to be presented. The individual in this video would have been Beverly, and she shares advice she gives to caregivers as a support group facilitator. So some of the advice Ms. Beverly shares is that you can take your time when responding to someone with dementia. You cannot expect the person living with the disease to behave as he or she might have in the past with a reasonable response. So it's really tempting to try and reason with an individual that has dementia. I'll be honest, when I first started, I tried to do it too. And I learned real quickly that that can really frustrate and agitate someone. And it doesn't really get us anywhere. So try and fight that urge as much as possible. And take your time when, so sorry. You cannot expect someone living with disease behavior. Okay, so if the communication of yours isn't getting the desired response, focus on what you can change and what you're doing in that situation. Next slide. Thank you. So when communicating with the person in the middle stages, approach the person gently. You want to identify yourself and approach the person from the front and at eye level. That means that if someone's in a wheelchair or utilizing a walker, you may have to crouch down a little bit, but it's really worth it. Call the person by their name and say who you are in relationship to this person. So an example, when I work with my clients, I say, hi, I'm Jonna Stagg, and I'm the social worker at the clinic who's going to be assisting you today. So that lets them know who I am and where I am. This may help orient the person and get their attention. Sometimes using touch can show that you care, even when your words are just about a task and are not understood. A gentle touch can also get a person's attention. And I do want to make sure that if they're in the early stages, you may want to talk about, is it okay if I touch you on the shoulder? Is it okay if I rub your back? That kind of stuff, because we don't know everybody's story, and touch may be something someone does not enjoy. So that would be something you may want to make sure of. And don't criticize, correct, or impose your perspective. That will most likely backfire. So you'll want to pay attention to your facial expressions and your tone of voice. try and be as calm and as patient as possible. The person can feel either your tension or your misunderstanding. And finally, remember to take the time to communicate. Give yourself and the person you're talking with enough time to respond, interact, and connect. Next slide. So it's also a video. This would have been Rebecca, who talks about adjusting her own thoughts and responses when her mother continued to repeat herself. And in this instance, you would have found out that Rebecca's mother is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So Rebecca states that it can be frustrating for everyone when someone living with dementia repeats questions, statements, or behaviors. Rather than trying to convince the person of what you remember happening, it helps to accept that the person does not remember it as you do. Accept his or her perspective and respond from that standpoint. It's going to be easier for you to adjust your perspective than asking the individual diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's for them to alter their perspective. Next slide, please. When you join in the person's reality, you take a little time to see their world as he or she may see it right at that moment. When you see from their perspective, a person's behavior can often become understandable to you. Due to the changes to the brain that accompany this disease, the person will probably not be able to see your perspectives. So you'll be the one that will need to use respect and empathy to see the world that they're in. Joining the person's reality is key to helping the person have his or her say, and it provides soothing and reassurance. To do this, you can take the steps listed in the slide. So listen to figure out what the person wants or needs. This means paying attention to both the words and the behavior of the person. Keep in mind that the person may be saying something about his or her feelings or needs, but may be feeling something else on a deeper level that needs attention from you. For example, I can still drive just fine, maybe something you hear, but it also may contain the feeling, I don't want to give up my independence, so don't take that from me. Another example is, stop taking over my life, I hate it. That may actually reflect meaning of, I hate this disease and I don't understand why I can't do what I always could. So there may be some underlying emotion. And let the person know you understand what he or she said, what he or she may be feeling and why, and whether they're expressed through words, behaviors, or both. Answer any question or address any issue that they may bring up. The best thing is be brief and to the point. And most importantly, respond to the emotions behind the behavior or the concern. For example, if a person's communicating with words, you might say, you seem sad. Do you feel sad? And then wait for a response. If the person says yes, you may want to guess the cause and ask maybe, do you miss the way things used to be? Do you miss your grandkids? Do you miss your dog? And if that person says yes, you could just validate them and say, I do too. If the person's communicating with a behavior, see if you can identify and speak about the emotion behind the behavior. If the person's rummaging through possessions, it may be a way of communicating boredom or needing something. Potentially hitting during bathing can also be a way to say the person feels too hot, maybe too cold. Maybe they're uncomfortable being unclothed, or feeling out of control. And finally, only after you've responded to the emotions, refer and redirect the person by encouraging them to do something that may shift the person's thinking and behavior. An example may be like, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be here with you today. Let's go outside for a walk. Or, I know you really enjoy that TV show. Let's sit down and watch Golden Girls or something like that. In this way, you're gradually moving the person from feeling sad to doing something that can actively change the emotion that they're feeling. And it can lift their spirits. Next slide, please. So you want to keep it as slow and as basic as possible. So take your time and be patient when you communicate. The more you slow down, the less resistance you'll encounter because the person won't feel rushed and unable to keep pace. Rushing leaves the person feeling frustrated, inadequate, maybe even upset with themselves, and then resistant. So by taking your time, you may avoid the frustration that everyone will be feeling. And make sure you use those short sentences and basic words and speak as clearly as possible and be specific. It sometimes helps to offer a choice if you think at the end of a sentence could be, what do you want for breakfast? And instead of just waiting and having an open question, you could be like, do you want eggs or do you want oatmeal? So making sure you give them options. That also provides them with a little bit of that power back, because when you get this diagnosis, a lot of things are out of your control. There's really nothing you can do with the no cure. Sometimes you don't understand what's happening, so there's a lot of a loss of power. So being able to give them choices gives them a little bit of control over their life again. Next stage, please. Make sure you give multiple cues. So it's helpful to give the person many different cues as you communicate. This reinforces your words and clarifies your message. If you can use visual cues or gestures, avoid sudden movement, and you'll want to use gentle gestures and pointing, but avoid making sudden gestures that may startle the person. It may be good to write things down for the person. Reminder notes, calendars, labels, lists. Those are some of the examples that individuals have used to help remind people what is to be done and who needs to be seen and things like that. Labeled photos can even help a person keep track of names and relationships in the middle stages. And I will say I had a really touching thing happen when I worked in inpatient. A family had printed a blanket with all the family photos on it, and it had them labeled. And every day we'd sit down with this person and like talk about her grandkids or her daughter. So it was a really great idea, and she really enjoyed it. And moving on, so make sure you offer answers in your questions. So it is much easier for someone in the middle stage to choose what to eat for lunch. For example, if a question is not open-ended, like what do you want for lunch, Bill, is a question that may leave the person feeling overwhelmed and stuck for an answer. This often leads to confusion or, easiest of all, refusal. But it makes it much easier for the person to answer the question phrase, Bill, I'm making sandwiches for lunch. Would you want ham or turkey? The person can choose one or the other and will often choose the last option mentioned. If he seems stuck, you can suggest an answer such as, how about ham? So it's okay to gently guide if you need to. Repeat informations or questions. So although you may have many reminders in place, plan on needing to repeat information you provide or questions you ask. The person may not be able to decode your message completely the first time, and repetition can help. And you'll really want to try to turn negatives into positives. For example, if you need to get the person into the shower and they always resist the task, rather than saying, it's time for your shower, triggering resistance, you can say, let's go get you cleaned up for the day so you'll be ready for Cindy's visit this afternoon. So making it more pleasant and a more positive experience. You'll also want to avoid quizzing the person. So quizzing the person means asking them to try harder to remember something, or saying that he or she knows an answer and asking the person to think again is unfair and doesn't work. Trying harder just leads to frustration. It is far more respectful and helpful to give a person the information that he or she needs for the task or situation, along with reminders as needed. Next slide, please. So you'll want to respond empathetically and reassuringly. Let the person know that you are there and listening and that you hear their concerns. The facts are far less important than a person's feelings and their view of reality. These feelings and perspectives are very real to the person, even though they may not match reality. Responding to those feelings can help you avoid resistance. And to provide reassurance that you are together and safe, and that you're there to help. So that's really one of the best things you can do to try and make your individual feel safe, is providing reassurance and providing familiarity. Let the person know that you hear and understand the thoughts and feelings he or she is experiencing. And as long as there's not a safety issue, agree and go with the flow, finding common ground whenever possible. And a great example I had an individual that I work with. She is in late stage of dementia, so her long-term memory is more intact than her short-term memory, and she is always looking for her grandchildren. So I agree with her, and I'll walk around with her. I usually walk around the clinic with her, trying to find them. And at that point, the provider is assessing how she's walking, how are her motor movements. So we find a way to make common ground whenever possible. And you want to make make any adjustments to the situation that are necessary, and then redirect the person to another activity if needed. And by now, you're probably noticing that some of these things are similar to when somebody's in mild stage. So a lot of the tactics are the same as you kind of continue, just adding on more depth. Next slide, please. So this is the late stage. So in the late stage, the person may use only a few words, but he or she still needs to connect and communicate. So since the person has lost many functions by the late stage, you may feel a strong urge to do something. I know I did. I can speak for myself. And usually your presence and connection with the person are far more important than doing a specific thing for that person. You're going to want to remember that person is an adult with a sense of self that continues throughout the stages. You connect with the aspects of self by remembering the person's history and respecting their preference. The goal is to help the person feel content and happy wherever possible. And you'll want to keep talking. I know it's really tempting to wait for feedback or maybe try and sit in silence to see if they do something. But make sure you try and keep talking. You can use familiar words, names, phrases. If the person liked poems, one of the individuals I worked with inpatient had a Western book. He thoroughly enjoyed Roy Rogers. So we made him a book that we would sit down and talk with him about. And he was definitely in the severe stages. And you'll want to try and use the 5 senses to connect with a person living with dementia or Alzheimer's in the late stages. This can be done through touch, sight, sound, smell, and taste. It can help to try and understand the person's feelings in the late stage as well. So connecting through the 5 senses is a way to connect that feels comfortable to the person. Next slide, please. So the next slide is also a video. This would have been Sandra, who talks about connecting with her mother in the late stage of the disease. Unfortunately, she doesn't really hit on any points in this one. So I'm just going to go ahead and move to the next one. Thank you. So it can help to try and understand the person's feelings in the late stage. So connecting through the 5 senses is the best way to feel more connected and a good way to feel comfortable. So here are some ideas of ways you can connect through touch. Maybe feeling different fabrics, identifying shapes by touch, lotion on the hands, like a massage, identifying everyday items in a bag by touch, maybe visiting animals, molding non-toxic clay or dough. You can even hold the person's hand or stroke their arm or back. This may be the most powerful way to connect non-verbally. They also have a newer thing called a fidget apron, which has like a bunch of tasks on it that the individual can fidget with and use touch. And that seemed to be really popular on the unit I worked at. Next slide, please. So here are some ways to connect with using sight. So maybe laminate brightly colored pictures to look at together, or watch videos of animals, nature, travel, maybe photo albums, or is there photos of famous paintings, favorite settings, or prominent people from this individual's past? Maybe watching birds or looking at aquariums, painting with watercolors, or maybe even going outside or sitting by an open window together to experience the environment and using all the senses at once. You feel the sunshine, you're seeing people and pets, you're hearing nature sounds, you're feeling the breeze, and maybe smelling incoming rain or the fresh scent of cut grass. So those kinds of things. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about sound. So maybe you want to listen to familiar music. That could be including a favorite musical style that may stir happy memories, such as jazz. There was one individual I worked with that loved Aretha Franklin, and we would play her pretty consistently on the unit, and this individual would dance. So music can really inspire people. Listening to recordings of sound, nature, farms, cities, animals, even babies. Maybe identifying some musical instruments that this person enjoys. If there's a song or maybe even speech in a person's native language, if that is something that they desire. You could read books, poetry, scripture, or newspaper articles. We actually used to get children's books for our individuals on the dementia unit, things like Shel Silverstein, and sit down and read those with them. And you'll want to let the person hear a very gentle tone in your voice. Next slide, please. So we are going to talk about smell. The sense of smell is one of our most basic senses. Although this sense may diminish with age and disease progression, consider using some of the ideas on this slide to connect with the person. So you could make small plastic bags containing items in there for the person to smell under supervision, maybe herbs or spices, cotton balls dipped in essential oil, grass clippings or fragrant flowers, tea or coffee beans. You can even use fragranted lotion for hands. You may also want to have a variety of small fragrant candles that are strongly scented when unlit to smell. You could also use like the essential oil diffuser. I've seen that used before and people really have enjoyed that. So remember using scents that the person will find familiar and pleasant. And keep in mind any allergies that they may have and avoid any scents that might aggravate an individual. Next slide, please. And connecting through taste. So well into the late stage, people living with dementia enjoy tasting favorite foods and flavors. So here are some ways you may provide some strong flavor sensations for the person. However, as the ability to swallow diminishes, choking becomes a hazard. So please be aware of that. And please be sure to provide only what a person can swallow safely. So some examples of taste are connecting through taste would be favorite foods, home baked goodies, popsicles, flavored drinks, ice creams and puddings, those kinds of things. Next slide, please. So to summarize, maximizing our connection or connectedness with a person living with dementia involves adhering to a few guidelines. Understanding what is and isn't possible to change by understanding all you can about the disease. So stay up to date on the latest information and scientific breakthroughs on Alzheimer's disease and other dementias by attending workshops and conferences. Know and accept the cognitive and functional limitations of the person to help you set a realistic expectation of the person. Remember that the person is an adult with a sense of self and that they should always be respected. Remember to use feelings to connect. You can convey your mood through your actions and your tone of voice. The person will pick up and reflect on those feelings. And stay focused on your positive feelings for the person to increase your understanding of their reality. Demonstrate you care for the person by trying to connect. Make sure you listen, observe, and try to decode what the person is communicating about for their wants or their needs. And by joining in a person's reality, you can better understand what is needed and how to intervene. Communication evolves through the stages of Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, and adapting those changes requires commitment. So by adjusting your communication as the disease progresses, you can learn how to connect deeply and continue on a journey with your loved one. Next slide, please. So this is also a video we would have heard from Dr. Sam Fazio of the Alzheimer's Association's home office. And his key points in this would have been Caring for yourself while you care for someone else can have an effect on both you and the person living with the disease. You can provide better care for a person living with dementia if you are well rested and taking care of your physical and emotional needs. So, a lot of times at the clinic, I have conversations with caregivers to remind them that they are human. It's one of the easiest things to forget, and that it's okay to mess up. Really, you're doing the best you can, and that is good. I mean, the person is there, they have you to care for them, and we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. So I encourage individuals to have some grace with themselves and to treat themselves with kindness as they grow and learn to work with the individual that is diagnosed with dementia. Next slide, please. So there is some resources from the Alzheimer's Association. They are all free, so none of these services cost. And there is a 24/7 helpline, so it is available around the clock, 365 days a year. And although it's a free service, there are specialists and master level clinicians to offer confidential support and information to people living with the disease, caregivers, family, and the public. So you can contact the hotline day or night. And a great example I've had of this is I had one of my people in the clinic come, and they were having some difficulty getting their loved one who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's to sleep. It was 2:00 in the morning. Of course, none of the doctors are in the office. So she called the helpline, and she was actually able to speak with the master level clinician, talk about what she was going through, and get strategies of how to maybe help her mom get to sleep. So they're a great resource. And we all know those kind of situations don't happen from 9 to 5 every single day. So the fact that it is 24/7 is really important. I do want to stress, though, this is a helpline, not an emergency line. So if there is an emergency, please make sure you call 911, because these people on the helpline will not be able to assist in the same way. So I do want to make that very clear. When you contact the helpline, you're speaking to a master level care consultant, and it can be for decision-making support, crisis assistance, or education on issues that you may face every single day. You could also learn about symptoms of Alzheimer's and other dementia. You can find out about local programs and services that may be able to help your individual thrive and have a wonderful life. You can get general information about legal, financial, and care decisions, as well as treatment options for managing symptoms. You can receive help in your preferred language through the bilingual staff or translation service, which accommodates more than 200 languages. And you can access support through the line at any point if assistance required, and even through a teletype, so like a Zoom device if you need to do that, but you can call the line and ask them to do that. Next slide, please. So much like the program you're attending now, the Alzheimer's Association also offers education programs. These are a majority of the programs listed on the slide. And you can either do them by webinar or by phone, and we are starting to do in person as well, as long as we know the safety requirements. So they're available to anyone, and they are free, and you can find more information at communityresourcefinder.org. And that is all together, and I will repeat that again. So that is communityresourcefinder.org all together. So we talk about the 10 warning signs, understanding Alzheimer's and dementia, dementia conversations, the effective communication strategies, which we are doing today, legal and financial planning, understanding and responding to dementia-related behaviors, and many, many more. They're developing programs pretty much consistently to try and meet the needs of the community and figure out what people are seeking when it comes to education about Alzheimer's. Next slide, please. So this is our community resource finder. So again, communityresourcefinder.org is where you'll see this. And by visiting the Community Resource Finder online tool, you can search for local community living services, day programs, medical resources, and more. So that's whether you're in this area or across the country. So you can find services for someone living with dementia or Alzheimer's and make contacts to ensure safety and comfort. And I can't stress enough, this is everywhere, all over the country. So there's no limit or restrictions to setting or place or anything like that. Next slide, please. So this is ALZConnected. This is the association's very active online community for caregivers and people living with dementia or Alzheimer's. ALZConnected online message boards have over 50,000 members who share their thoughts, questions, and ideas with each other 24 hours a day. You're free to browse through the forums without creating a profile, and in this way, you can learn directly from other caregivers. The most important resource we find is other caregivers or care partners, because of course everyone's journey is a little different, but they may have had something going on a little similar to what you may have going on. And they're able to provide suggestions for what they tried, keeping in mind it may or may not work, but at least it will give you some ideas and maybe help you think outside the box. Again, you do not have to create a profile, and you can just browse through however you like. And this is really for anyone. So it can be people living with the disease, care partners, caregivers, family members, friends, someone who lost somebody because of Alzheimer's and dementia. So there's really a variety of resources on this website. And of course, it caters to either being the caregiver or the individual diagnosed. And it may lead you to different pages more depending on which one you click. So I do want to let you know that as well. Next slide, please. So this is the Alzheimer's Navigator. So when facing Alzheimer's disease, there is so many things to consider. It can be very overwhelming. Alzheimer's Navigator helps guide caregivers to answers by creating a personalized action plan and linking your information, support, and local resources. So it's kind of a hub for your plan, essentially. And it's a great place to just store information and be able to have it on the ready. And you can also share this plan with family and friends and give them access as well. So I do want to say that. Next slide, please. So I know we're just about almost 15 minutes shy, but that is the end of the presentation. And is there any questions?
Jonna, thank you for that. You offered so many great resources that the Alzheimer's Association provides. I was just amazed by the various resources and sites. We did have a couple questions come in, if you wouldn't mind.
Not at all. I will do my best.
Sure. So we know that there's various forms of dementia. Anything that you would suggest might be nuances between various types of dementia, say Alzheimer's, and other types. So anything that might be specific to a Alzheimer's, for example.
Yeah. So when it comes to Alzheimer's, I'm trying to think about the best way to say this. There are few nuances between Alzheimer's and dementia. They overlap quite a bit. With Alzheimer's, you may see a slower decline. And when I say that, I mean, sorry, I'm trying to think about the best way to phrase this. So the reason we tried to identify what type of dementia an individual has is because it lets us know how they may progress. So Alzheimer's may progress in more of a steady decline, as opposed to maybe frontal temporal dementia that looks more like a step stool, or Lewy body dementia, which can kind of go a little bit of everywhere. So it kind of lets us know the expected progression. And that's really like the main nuance, if that makes sense.
Okay. Every day is different in the life of someone with dementia and their caregiver. What would you say to if perhaps communication is difficult on a particular day? What would you say to that caregiver in terms of how they communicate in the future if it's difficult on a particular day?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things I've heard that's helpful with that, and this is from observing my therapeutic direct care staff at the hospital I worked at long ago, they would come back. So the best suggestion I have is, let's say you're asking Miss Smith, like, Miss Smith, let's go get you cleaned up. Your daughter is coming to visit. And she's like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, I don't want to do that. Try your best not to hound at it. I know it's tempting. I know it is, believe me. But take a moment and step back. As long as there's no tight schedule, you can always come back to it. There's really no need to do it in that moment. So that's what we kind of recommend, is take a break, take a moment, and make sure that you're okay, and also that your individual is okay, and that you both are at a level emotional state. Does that answer the question?
It does.
Okay.
I really picked up on that you mentioned that sometimes you can't dwell or ask questions about the past. That will be difficult. It relies on memory or talk about something in the future. But I love the comment about kind of focus the communication on the here and now, kind of what's happening in the present moment.
Yeah.
Anything else you might be able to say about that?
Yeah. The way it was described to me, so I actually had a great mentor. And the way it was described to me is, if you are an individual living with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's and dementia, typically your short-term memory is what initially goes. So imagine that maybe you're introduced to someone, or you're in a new setting, and then a couple hours later, you don't know where you are, and everything is new, everything is terrifying. So trying to be that main support for the person, the one consistent that they have, is very important, and trying to keep them in that moment. Because if they're trying to think about the future or the past, that can also be scary, because maybe they realize, oh my gosh, I don't remember my grandchildren, or oh my gosh, I have a daughter. Like, those might be the things you kind of hear. So you really want to try and engage in that present, because it's going to give you the most interactive experience.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for tonight's presentation. All the information shared tonight was truly amazing, and I know that it really will benefit people that tuned in, those adult children or those aging parents, as they go through those stages with their parents and work through those communication techniques. So really valuable information. So thank you so much.
Anytime.
Again, I want to thank our program sponsor, Harmony at Greensboro, for sponsoring tonight's program. We are grateful to have program sponsors to make programs happen like this. So it truly is amazing. Again, I want to remind everybody that we will be going to in-person meetings starting in June. They will still be on the same day. However, the time will move to 6 p.m. We hope that you can, meet us in person, but of course we understand if you can't, and the programs will still be held virtually. Our programs will still be recorded so that you can join us later if you're unable to attend at that exact time. We look forward to seeing everybody at the next program, and thank you all for attending tonight. And Jonna, thank you for an amazing presentation.
Thank you. Anytime.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.